Hey guys, Tyler with Meeple Mountain here, bringing you another board game review, this time from our friends at WizKids Games, who have given us a doozy of a game to review. It is the Mage Knight Ultimate Edition box. There is a lot packed into this game. At its core, this is a deck builder sandbox adventure game for 1 to 5 players. So there's a solo mode, and this goes all the way up to 5. This is packed with all kinds of expansion content as well that adds even more to this game. This is heralded, it's an older game really, but it's viewed as one of the best out there in the industry, especially in that deck builder sandbox realm with things. It has a pretty high complexity, so there's a lot to cover. So I'm going to do the 30,000 foot view for the interest of time. I'm not going to get into every detail of everything in this game, as there really is a lot. Learning this was a joy and a privilege, but it really was a big bite. So we're going to do a high-level overview of this game, talk about what you can expect to find in the box, as well as the general kind of gist of what you're doing, and the interactions that you can hope to find in this game. And I'll tell you why I really enjoyed playing this. Of course, you have me at Deck Builder. I'm already in, but there is a lot of really, really awesome content in this box. I'm excited to get you to the table so that you can see it all. So with that said, let's jump in and learn how to play Mage Knight. Welcome to the world of Mage Knight, a game so glorious and large I can barely fit most of the components on one shot like this here. This is a deck-building sandbox adventure game for 1 to 5 players where you will take on the role of a hero with an asymmetric deck of starting cards, setting out to claim and defeat a certain scenario. There are many scenarios set throughout Mage Knight, but today we'll be focusing on a 3-player setup for one of the main competitive scenarios, which I would say is kind of the standard Mage Knight experience that you can expect to find in this game. In this game, you will be running through what you'll be building as a randomized set of map tiles as you search for one of these mini cities that are set out throughout the land. The lower brown map tiles will actually reveal these cities, and you'll be attempting to overthrow the evil forces that occupy them and claim them for yourself, all the while doing various adventures and actions throughout the board as you discover them to gain the all-important fame. As you claim fame, your hero will actually move up this track. They'll level up, gaining new actions, skills, and abilities, increasing their hand size and their starting armor value, all with the intent of purpose of having the most fame at the end of a predetermined number of day and night rounds. You will be playing your entire deck of cards in each of these rounds, so you'll be wanting to make your deck more and more powerful as you go. You'll do this by adding in spells, empowered actions, or even hiring units to fight alongside you. All of this will begin to continue to build your unique asymmetry as you try to write your legend here in the world of Mage Knight. You'll want to manage your reputation carefully with the locals as well, as that can have a positive or negative impact in the actions you take. You'll also be collecting these glowing mana crystals here, which will empower your actions and spells to make you even more powerful. Having the correct build and combos in your deck is vital to set yourself apart from your opponents. There is a lot of interactions that you'll have on the map, as this entire deck of cards here lays out all of the various things that you can discover and find, and these are all of the different enemy tokens and interactions that you can have on the map. So there is a lot to get into and unpack here, and as I mentioned, it's really too much to talk about all of the details in one review video, but what I want to do is give you all a snapshot of what you can expect to encounter in the standard competitive mode of the game. And so we're going to break this down, and we're going to take little bites. We're going to take looks at each of these pieces and build them all together so that you can walk away from this video confident that you understand how to play a game of Mage Knight and what to expect when you jump into a game. So with that said, let's take a closer look at a player character as well as the fame board, the round tracker, and the actions that you'll take on a given round. Let's talk a little more about that, and then we'll zoom in and look at the cards and enemy types that you can hope to encounter in a game of Mage Knight. Alright, first things first. To get into a game of Mage Knight, we need to understand our character, right? We're taking on the role of a Mage Knight, and we need to understand what we're bringing to the table, so to speak. So here is a layout of one of the Mage Knight characters that you can play in Ultimate Edition, which is Krang. Krang is this cool-looking, kind of orcish druid type character, like a shaman almost, and it kind of shines through in some of his cards, those shamanic abilities. And so you would take on the role of a particular Mage Knight. There are several to to choose from, and you can pick one, and you'll take on their character and all of their components. And this is kind of what, minus these, a general starting setup would look like. You're going to have a deck of 16 cards. It is relatively similar to everyone else's set, except you'll have 2 unique cards to your character in there. So you'll have a little bit of difference in flavor there that will kind of show through and shine through with that. You're going to have a stack of these little tokens here. You'll have one that's blank that will start out here. This is corresponding to units that you'll control, and it tells you how many units that you can actually control. Units are a type of card that you can kind of hire, and they'll work with you kind of as part of your team. They'll have different abilities that you can choose to activate. It's just a different way to build your character out, and they're very, very helpful. As you level your character up, this shows your current level, but once you reach the next level benchmark, this will come down and become another controllable unit, and you'll actually level your character up, increasing potentially your hand size as well as your core armor. We'll talk about what armor class means as well as hand size a little bit more as we go. You'll have a lot of flags. Flags are used for placing your kind of fame down on places. As you complete different things, control keeps or dungeons or towers, mage towers, cities, you'll start putting your flags down to show the things that you've done and the things that you control. This is, in this scenario that we're talking about, a competitive game. And so you may actually be trying to wrest control away from another character, another Mage Knight who's set out. So if they took over a city, you might want to take that city, to take that fame away from them, as there's lots of fame to be earned at the end of the game for the things that you control. So this is a little bit of an area control style game. So these flags are very important. These face-up items would not be face-up in a game. They'll be all face down, but these are the potential skills that this character can unlock. And as you can see, you might already start to get overwhelmed if you zoom in and want to look at some of these abilities. Some of them make a little bit of sense. Some of them you may have no idea what the heck these things mean, and that's okay. It was a challenge for me as well, but thankfully there's a nice little cheat sheet that walks you through what each of those abilities do. And as you level up again, something else that you will get to do is acquire some of these skills, not all of them thankfully, but some of them, to build out your play style as you go throughout the game of Mage Knight. As you gain fame, you'll level up and be able to access some of these skills that will give your character an edge, some unique asymmetry that feels very Krang in this case, right? And you'll be able to utilize those to build your play style out, whatever leans you and leads you to victory. So this is what you'll bring into a game of Mage Knight with you. This is what you'll start with, but it is certainly not where you will end. There are lots of different things that you can activate and gain abilities to with spells, with advanced actions, and all kinds of things. But let's take a look a little bit more at the base cards that you have and talk about how some card play works. Then we'll take a look at the main boards and talk about how you gain fame and reputation and what rounds look like. All right. Here we have a look at some of the cards that you'll find in your starting deck. And I want to talk about kind of how card play works, what you can kind of expect from it, and we'll talk a little bit about rounds. So again, you have a 16 card starting deck of cards. This is still Krang's stuff. Let's say he was level 3 in this case, but really rounds of the game are going to go where you, every turn on your turn, you will have this many number of cards in your hand, in this case 5. And you can play any number of cards that you want for your turn. You will then draw back up to your hand size. It'll go to the next player. This will go until somebody has run out of cards to draw or wants to say that they are ending the turn. When they can't draw any more cards, they can end the round. Every other player will get one more turn, and then the round will end. Most scenarios have a set number of rounds that you as a player are able to engage in, and then the game will end. So it's another way that kind of the game will end. We're playing through so many rounds. Whoever gets the most points wins. So those rounds are very important. The rounds also become day and night, which affects a lot of things. We'll take a look at that and talk a little more about that once you guys have a little bit of an understanding on cards and how they work. So there are several types of cards in the game, and we'll take a look at some of them here. Most of the cards, as you notice, are going to kind of have a top and a bottom. These symbols up here in the top kind of tell you what general style of card they might be, whether it's for influencing or acting with people, kind of utility cards, combat cards. But generally, your base deck is going to kind of be a nice smattering of all of those types of things, from things that allow you to influence, to attack or block, things that allow you to move, in the instance of swiftness here, that will let you move around the board. All of these things are important. And as you take your turn, you can kind of choose what action you want to take on your turn and play cards that will allow you to take that particular action. For instance, movement. If I had multiple cards with movement values, I can play multiple cards together to gain an increased movement speed for my move that turn. So you're not limited to one card per action. You can stack cards together, whatever is most beneficial to you. Same with influence and same with attack. Now you'll notice there's a bottom action that may be different, like in the case of swiftness, or may just be better, like in the case of promise here. Well, these cards need mana to be powered up, and so that's a big aspect of Mage Knight, is that you're trying to manage your mana and use it appropriately. Now, there's three ways that you can gain mana, and there's different colors of mana as well. There are kind of the base colors of mana, which is going to be the white, the green, the blue, and the red. There's also going to be day or night specific manas, which is gold or black. Now, to use these cards, you will need to have the appropriate mana matching the base color of them. Black mana is only usable at night and actually makes very specific cards incredibly powerful. And you'll know, we'll kind of look at some of those when we get there, but these are great for spells. They really make spells super, super powerful. Gold mana is only usable during the day rounds, and it acts as a wild mana, so it can be used for any of the mana that you need. Now, these little tokens here that look really fun, they kind of are doing double work right now. They can be called mana tokens. For the instance here, you see concentration lets me gain a specific type of mana token. Tokens kind of come out here and sit on the board and can be used, but they're use it or lose it. If I end my turn, they go away. We don't get those anymore. They're gone. If they sit in my board, these tokens represent what are called mana crystals, which is different than a mana token. Crystals will stay with me from round to round. The only rule is I can't have three or more of the same type of mana crystal here. So I couldn't have 4 green mana crystals sitting in my inventory. I'd have to diversify. So these tokens do a lot of double work. But to use the empowered version of a particular type of card, I need to have the right type of mana token, mana crystal, or mana dice. And we'll look at mana dice in just a second. But I would spend it to empower that card to let me use the more powerful version of it. So that's another way that you can use cards. You basically pick, do I want to take the base ability? Do I want to empower it with mana to use the bottom more powerful ability? And you'll notice in the case of swiftness, these things change entirely. It goes from movement to ranged attacking. And we'll talk about, the attack rounds and how that works a little bit later. But some of these cards will change drastically based on what action you choose to take. But just know that the bottom of any of these printed cards needs the mana symbol, green, red, blue, for instance, to activate that bottom ability. And that's how the general idea of card play works. Something else about cards is you can always choose to play them sideways when you play another card. For instance, I played an Influence 4 card. I can always play this sideways as a wild card to add a base ability 1. So in instance, I could make this an Influence 1 card if I play it sideways to make this play an Influence of 5. You can do this for movement, you can do this for attacking, you can do this for influence. There's lots of ways that you can use your cards. So you have to kind of strategize what you want to accomplish most with your cards, knowing that you're going to go through basically your entire deck each round. So you want to make sure you build good synergies and strategies into your cards as you go to make sure that you have the cards available to you to maximize your fame generation and push your kind of unique strategy forward throughout the rounds of Mage Knight. So with again, very rushed, but very general understanding of how cards work, let's zoom over and take a look at the kind of giant board about fame and reputation, talk about how rounds actually work, and take a look at the mana dice. All right, here we have the fame and reputation board, some tactics cards, the round tracker, and the turn order for the 3 characters that we have in this setup, which is Krang, Tovak, and Norwas. So these are our 3 characters, and this would be a setup that you would see starting out in the general game of Mage Knight. Again, this is for the competitive scenario. There's lots of ways this could be, but this is pretty much what you can expect to find in the base game. So let's talk through it all. Here you have your fame tracker. Fame is made in a lot of different ways throughout the game of Mage Knight, but predominantly you're going to make it by taking over keeps and mage towers and castles and cities, defeating particular enemies that you find throughout the board, or maybe even doing some nasty stuff like assaulting monasteries or trying to raid villages. There's all kinds of ways that you can make this fame, but as your character makes fame, they move up the track. Whenever they kick into a new zone, they get the level up ability that is shown on that particular section, and it really just oscillates between 2 level up options, which is basically you gain an advanced action card and a skill for your character, or if you come down to these sections with the kind of the circle, you will move one of your tokens over like I showed on Krang's character that can actually increase your hand size and your base defense. Base defense is super, super important when it comes to combat as to how much damage you can soak before you start taking wounds. So getting that up is very helpful. So generating fame is, of course, the goal to the game in general because that's how you win, but it is also important to level your character up quickly to make them as competitive and advanced as possible so you can make more and more fame. It's a really fun snowball effect they have going here. This is the reputation track, and it goes infinitely to the negative and up to +5 on the positive. The actions that you take in the world of Mage Knight will affect your reputation. There are lots of ways to affect your reputation, again, by sacking monasteries and villages. That will obviously make it go down. This is basically reflective of the general populace's view towards you. If you liberate cities and defeat certain monsters and help people, this will go up. And a positive and neat aspect of the game is based on your reputation. Doing bad things can sometimes have short-term gain, but this will also affect the cost of cards and units that you want to recruit to your cause. If you have a very positive reputation with the locals, as you go to recruit units, you will actually notice that they're cheaper for you to recruit because of this cost. This actually acts as basically free currency that you would need to pay to recruit influence in this game to get those characters. This also acts as a negative where you have to pay more influence to try and get units to your cause. So having this tracker and maintaining a positive reputation can be a strategy. There are some low reputation strategies that I've seen played as well, but predominantly having a high reputation can be very helpful in getting a lot of discounts to move your influence throughout the game along. And influence is used in a lot of various ways, so having this high reputation can be very helpful. So this is kind of the general flow of the game. Now we talked about how this game works in rounds. I just want to kind of repeat it and make sure it's as clear as possible since this game is so complicated. This game is broken into a series of rounds that are played out through turns where players will play their hand size worth of cards every turn, running through their deck of cards until someone is out of cards to draw. When they do, they signal the end of the round, and that round will conclude with every other player getting a turn, then we'll move into the next round. In most scenarios have a certain amount of rounds. Rounds also oscillate between daytime and nighttime rounds. That changes the mana that can be used here, again gold or black mana as we talked about in the previous video section, and also changes the movement costs for certain things. We'll talk about that in just a minute. You'll notice these little dice that I've been moving here. These are called the source dice. And we're going to roll these at the start of every round to see what kind of mana is in play. So I rolled these randomly at the start of our little setup here, but this would show the type of mana that's available from the source. And usually on a turn, you can only get 1 mana from the source. The ratio is 2 more than the number of players. So there's 3, so we have 5. These will allow you to also power up your abilities. So you don't always need mana tokens or crystals. You can use dice from the source, but if you don't have something that you can use here, you're kind of out of luck. Also, if you, in this case during day, rolled a black die, it just goes away because we can't use black mana at a nighttime phase. So this could be very limited pool based on the roll. And these will keep getting re-rolled as they're used and spent, so this will always change. It's not a reliable mana source. So if you want to make sure you have the right mana, you do want to think about generating tokens and crystals. So this is how kind of those source die will work. At the start of every round of the game, you will choose a tactic based on the day or the night tactics deck, and that will choose your turn order as well as some type, as you can see here, of super nice special ability potentially. Effectively, the later that you go in the turn order, the better ability that it is. But of course, going late has a lot of ramifications as you won't get some discovery bonuses. You'll be literally behind in terms of discovery. There's lots of things that can happen. So going early is generally nice in this game, but there are some reasons why you might want to go later because you can get some really nice bonuses from the cards. And these are unique. The night deck is different than the day deck for tactics, and so there's lots of gameplay that changes based on the day or night rounds of the game as well. Looking here at the round board, you'll also see these numbers on these hexes. This is going to tell you the amount of movement points that it takes to move into one of these types of zones, or from one of these types of zones. So we'll see that grasslands are going to be 2. They're the cheapest type of thing that you can move around in, while forests are a little more expensive during the day, but there's kind of a gray number here that shows you that they're way more difficult to navigate at night. Inversely, deserts are very hot and terrible to navigate during the day and cost 5 movement points, but are much easier at night when they're cool and only cost 3. So terrain will actually shift as you switch between the rounds as well, and the difficulty of moving around those types of terrain. So that, I think, this is something I really enjoyed with Mage Knight, is I like that the map feels alive as you go through the rounds and things change. You have to calculate and plan for those types of actions. Anyway, once players have chosen their tactics cards for the round, you're going to slot in these tokens here just to show turn order of who's going next, and these will shift, of course, based on every round, who picks what tactic card. And that's going to be the flow of the game. You'll go like this, kind of going back and forth between day and night rounds throughout a series of rounds predetermined by the scenario that you're playing until they're done. And then you'll tally up and see who has the most fame at the end of the game, and whoever has the most is victorious. It becomes the most notorious or famous Mage Knight in the kingdom. Let's go ahead and take a look now at the rest of the cards. There are 4 decks of cards that you can effectively navigate to add things to your deck that are positive, and there's one that adds things to your deck that are negative. So let's take a look at all of those and talk about what you can try to build into your deck, because of course we love deck building. So let's jump in and take a look at those. All right, there's a lot to jump into on this particular shot, but let's dive in. There are 5 total types of decks of cards that will be added to your deck throughout a game of Mage Knight. And as I mentioned, 4 of these are good things, things that you want, and 1 of them is bad. So let's start with the bad, shall we? Up here on the top left, we have the Wound deck. These are all just base single cards with blood drops. Wounds are bad. They clog your deck up in a terribly mean and malicious fashion in Mage Knight. They are going to be taken on through combat, and they can go to your units that you control. We'll talk about units in just a second, but they also will go to your personal hand. And what sucks about wound cards is they go into your hand, and they don't leave. They don't get discarded. It's not even as bad as just like, oh, I have a hand clogged with wounds, I'll get rid of them and next hand will be better. They stay with you, and they can be terrible. And so as you take on wounds, your hand size effectively becomes smaller and smaller until you can heal or remove these wounds in some way throughout the game. And so getting a lot of wounds can be incredibly crippling in a game of Mage Knight and is not to be underestimated. There are some abilities and monsters that will actually add them to your deck and your hand, which is even worse. And so these can be very, very crippling. That's why there's so many of them, is because there's a lot of ways that the enemies want to add these to your hand, and you've got a plan to manage and mitigate those gains very, very carefully. Next, we have units. There are basic units and elite units, indicated by silver and gold backing here. The game always is going to have what's called a unit offer, and there's going to be kind of a store, general deck building kind of store rules. There'll always be 3 of certain sets out, none of a certain set out, and then a bunch of these guys out as well, and those will reset on people's turns. These will not actually reset until the end of the round on the unit offer, and that means that it's kind of first come, first served on who gets what types of units. The basic units are going to be tier 2 or tier 1 units based on the top right hand side. They're going to have a cost on the left that's going to show you how much influence you need to spend to get them, where you can get them in this little kind of striped little ribbon medallion thing here. It tells you where you need to go to get them. Their armor class, which is how many hits they can take before they suffer a wound. When they suffer a wound, they're not usable until they're healed, and what kind of abilities they add. And there's lots of abilities. So we'll kind of break down some general rundown of abilities when we get into combat, but they can do lots of things. They can help you move, they can help you peek at things, they can do some siege or ranged attacks, they definitely like to attack, they can help you block, all kinds of stuff. These units can fit into any type of playstyle, and generally they're all good. It's just, can you afford them, and do you want to build your deck around them? So the thing to know about units: elite units will only come out when certain effects tell you to put them out, and they'll actually add on to the deck of things, and as you'll notice, they are much higher tier and much higher cost. They can go up to, I believe it's tier 5, and they'll have way better abilities and do really, really neat stuff, but they're super expensive on influence, so you have to make sure, or they may even have, in this case, requirements that your reputation be at certain levels, high or low, to get certain cards in the elite unit deck. And so there's a lot of strategy that kind of builds around who you want to add to your deck. The cool thing about units is they're always out. They don't actually go into your deck. That's a bit of a misleading statement on my part. They actually go into your command. And so units that you command are indicated by how many of these little tokens that you have. And so you'll put the unit under one of these little tokens. You start the game with one of them there, so everybody can have one unit under their command. As you level your character up, as we saw on the fame track, these will actually come off of your board and show your new armor value and hand size, and will actually flip down here, so you'll end up having multiple of these, meaning you can have multiple units. As you command a unit, you can actually move this to show that I'm activating a unit, and and you can choose one of the abilities on that unit to use. That unit's exhausted then until the end of the round, when you'll refresh them and get them back, unless you have an ability or something that states that you can refresh units before then. So having units is great because not only are they a valuable asset to your strategy, they also stay out all the time and are always available, and you don't have to kind of wait on you to luck into them in your hand. Next, we have artifacts up here. They're kind of shown by this like brass thick edging. They are never available or shown in the store. They're not really something you can just purchase willy-nilly. You have to earn them, and you'll get them through doing various things on the board, and we'll take a look at that in just a second. But getting into mage towers can sometimes grant them. Exploring in dungeons will certainly sometimes grant them. There's lots of ways that you can try to get these cards, but they're never available for you to just purchase. You have to do an action and overcome some obstacles to be able to find these particular cards. Next up, we have spells. Spells are down here on the bottom left. They're always going to be these purple looking cards, and they, again, as you notice, have kind of two actions on them, and they're usually very, very powerful. The top action, you'll see, still costs some form of mana, and we'll kind of show you on the top left what the general strategy or type of card it is, but you'll always have to spend mana for spells because, of course, you need mana for spells. On the bottom, these are very, very powerful effects. If you take the time to look at these, you'll see that they do some crazy stuff, but they often cost multiple mana and often cost black mana. Now, if you remember what we talked about in the rounds and with mana before, black mana can only be used at the nighttime, and you can have that as a mana crystal, a mana token, or from the source, but it's only usable on every other round during nighttime phases, which means these actions could only be cast on those rounds, but they are super powerful. So there's an interesting ebb and flow to the game as well, where during the day, because of gold mana, things are pretty flexible and easy to do. You can kind of get a lot done, but if you really want to do some heavy-hitting combat, you might want to plan around some evening actions during night phases, because that's when the black mana comes out, and that's when your spells are really, really potent. So there's some fun stuff you can do there if you want to kind of go a mage style to the build, leaning more to the mage than the knight. On the other side here, we have advanced actions. These are kind of your typical deck building store cards. These are more of the same kinds of cards that you had in your starting deck. They, of course, are double-edged, just like we talked about with the initial cards, where you need mana for the bottom action. These are just better cards, more cards. There will always be some of these available in the store, and you can purchase one of those cards and add them to your deck in certain ways. And the main way that you'll be doing that is through the advanced action, is leveling up. There's also rewards on cards and dungeons and things that will grant you these cards. And so these are things you'll want to get into your deck as well, because they are just better versions, a lot of times, of your base cards. So all of this plays into your strategy of how you make your Mage Knight unique and stand out. And then you're prepared to actually move around the map and engage with your enemies and explore dungeons and do all the cool things that Mage Knight lets you do. So let's jump in and take a look at those cool things, talk a little bit about map movement, exploration, enemies, and then we'll jump into the all-important explanation about combat. Alright, here we have the starting map set up for that 3-player game that we were talking about. When you build the map, there's some simple rules about putting the numbers a certain way and making sure that stars and circles line up. But this is a general layout for a starting map with 2 of our characters already on here. One of my favorite characters, Norwas, and Tovak over here sitting up as well. There's lots of things on the map, and we got to remember our movement costs to move around day or night, depending on where we're at. But this is a magical portal, and this is always going to be your starting tile. And on your turn, you're going to place your dude here to start the game, and then you'll move away, and someone else would start, place here, and move, so on and so forth. There's lots of stuff on the map, and this entire deck of cards pretty much is a breakdown of all of the things that are on this map. And again, that's too much to go into, but I just want to kind of point out a few things we have here. We have mines, crystal mines. Those will give you mana tokens of a particular type, mana crystals of that particular color. There's some healing glades that if you go there, you're able to actually heal wounds in your hand. That can be great. There's some villages where you can have specific interactions to heal or hire units and do all kinds of different things. There will be monasteries. Here we have a fort or a keep. Keeps have enemy units guarding them. We wouldn't know what this is, but if I flip that over, we'll see that there's an enemy there that we can defeat for a certain amount of fame. We'll kind of look at that more. These swords on the board will actually drop down these marauding orcs that want to run around and do all kinds of nonsense. And there's lots of fun things to be had here. Now, this board actually kind of builds out in an open format where we'll want to go and explore. Now, As we go, we will be getting types of tiles. There's two colors of tiles. There's what's called kind of basic beginner tiles and core tiles. If we go on the edges of the map, we'll actually be unlocking these yellow tiles, these kind of beginner tiles, as we kind of expand from the coastline here. And as we open these up, they're going to be good things, but generally they're nicer tiles. The core tiles are more challenging, have better rewards, tougher enemies, but they have the most important thing, which is the cities we're trying to find. As cities are a huge, huge, huge part of the game and give you some pretty powerful buffs. So let's just say, hypothetically, I was playing as Tovak and I wanted to explore. If I wanted to come over here and explore this region, I could move over here. And the moment you would move into an unexplored region, you'll take one of the tiles of the corresponding type and you Oop, I bumped my little camera. You will flip that over and you will set that tile and orient it based on those kind of rules that we discussed before, where you need to make sure your stars and your tiles line up correctly. So for instance, I could place this tile here to follow the coastline as the circle and the stars line up if I wanted to move this way. If I wanted to move into the interior, I could also potentially get a core tile, which would have to follow the same alignment rules with the numbers aligning properly and the stars aligning properly. Something like this would be a legal placement for this tile here. And I would notice that I've actually found one of the cities that can come into play as well. And the cities will have various levels depending on the player count and the difficulty of the scenario. And those are prime locations to be conquered. They're very powerful. They come with multiple stacks of enemies on them. And those enemies are fortified and very powerful and challenging, and so you're not going to just wander yourself into a city. But whenever you reveal a tile, for whatever reason, you will populate that section with tokens. For instance, here we have a mage tower that would put this down, and we also see that we have a orc token here that would come down for the marauding orcs. Same here, where we would place a keep token into this location and a draconum here who wants to run around. Of course, the draconum are super, super scary. So there's all kinds of effects and things that will happen on the board, but this is the general flow as you'll go, exploring and opening up the board, discovering the world together as a table, which is a very fun kind of exploratory sandbox environment. Now, just because this player here, Tovak, opened this section, that doesn't mean that another player can't come in and try to engage on any of these things. It's just who is opening where and how are you spreading out and exploring the board. I've seen games where people kind of wander off, people will stick together some games. There's different ways that you can play and interact, but there's lots of fun that can be had here. Now, as we mentioned, there are lots of things to fight and interact with on the board and in the game of Mage Knight. There are PvP options if you are playing a competitive game. If you ever move into a space with another player, you would engage in PvP, which is a unique combat situation. I'm going to cover the general combat, which is the PvE combat, which happens when you move onto keeps, mage towers, orcs, things like that, or with face-up enemy tokens like draconum or orcs. If you're ever adjacent to them and move and would still be adjacent to them, so kind of just swinging around them, they will actually engage in combat with you. So you can't just kind of flank around them. They become a buffer on the map. And so you will have to deal, unfortunately, with these enemies. And when you engage in combat, you will move to a combat moment in the game. So let's go ahead and kind of zoom in and talk about what combat looks like and how that works between a player character and any of the environmental effects on the board. All right, I've gone and done it. I have started combat with an enemy. I'm going to be fighting these little orc marauders, these little log riding looking guys here. And let's just say that I'm playing as Nawas here, and this is his current level. This is early in the game. He only has an armor value of 2. He has no units with him, his hand of 5, and this is his 5 cards in this hypothetical scenario. We've got the wounds nice and close so that we're ready for those when we need them. Now, combat in Mage Knight is very fun. It's quick, it's clean, it's very calculatable, and I really love it. But let's kind of talk about the symbology that we're seeing on kind of a basic enemy here, and we'll talk about combat, and then we'll look at some other examples. So this particular enemy is going to hit for 3 physical damage, which is kind of the base type of damage. It's the type of damage that we do predominantly when we start the game. This is their armor value, is how much damage you need to deal. You need to meet or exceed that armor value to kill them. And this is how much fame or victory points you're going to get when you beat them, if you beat them. Any abilities that they may have would be listed here, and any attack abilities would be listed here. These guys don't have any attack abilities, but they are fortified. We'll talk about what fortification kind of means. Now, combat is a very, very simple flow in the game of Mage Knight. It happens like this. We have ranged attacks, if there are any for us. We can choose to do a ranged fight to hit them first, like a first strike. If that kills them, we're done. We're good. Life is great. If we don't kill them, then we shouldn't do it at all because it doesn't stack. You don't weaken them or anything like that. Then the enemy attacks us, and we have to decide how we can tank or divide or take the damage that they would deal. Then we get a chance to do melee damage back to the enemy to hopefully defeat them. If not, then all of this was in vain. And that's an entire round of combat. You don't do multiple rounds. It's just one. Do you meet or exceed their armor value or not? That's pretty much the question that you have in a game of combat in Mage Knight, and I love it. So let's walk through this. So this is our armor value in hand. This is their armor value. So if we could, in this case with swiftness, do a ranged attack. We see that we do have a ranged attack down here. We see it's ranged attack 3. We could play a white mana if we had one from the source or from a token from our character with crystals, whatever, and we could play this card to do ranged attack 3. We see that it's 3. That's going to deal 3 damage to an enemy. If they did not have this symbol, 3 damage to this enemy would be enough to defeat it. Hooray, we've done the game, we've won, everything is great. We would get 2 fame, this token goes away, life moves on. Perfect combat. Except this particular enemy here has Fortified. Fortified means that range attacks don't work against them. It has to be a siege attack, and we'll kind of talk about that. It's a type of card. It is a more powerful version of a ranged attack, acts just like a ranged attack in the timing of combat, but is better than ranged attack. Siege attacks work in cities or on fortified enemies. Ranged attacks do not. You can add siege attacks and ranged attacks together to increase the strength of a ranged attack, but you can't add ranged attacks to siege attacks. You just can play siege attacks. So in this case, we can't defeat this enemy with ranged attacks with the hand that we have, so we have to move on. Now we get into their chance to hit us. They're going to deal 3 physical damage to us. And there's a couple options now that are available to us. We can try to block that damage. It's kind of an all or nothing situation here as well, where we have to meet or exceed the amount of damage being dealt to block it. Otherwise, we end up taking the damage. So we do see that we have a block 5 here. If we wanted to kind of go into that, but when we're thinking about our hands and what we want to do and making sure we defeat them, we might choose not to do that. We can choose to take that damage. If we take that damage, we could assign it to units based on their armor value if we had any. As I mentioned, we do not have any units. So what we do is we actually have to take some wounds. And the way this works is we have to take a wound to our hand. Unfortunately, that's no fun. We'll put him over here because we can't use that card for now. This will clog our hand up. It'll stay with us, so we won't be able to discard it. And then we would reduce the damage coming in by our armor value, in this case by 2. Unfortunately, we're still receiving another damage, which means we have to take another wound, and then we would reduce it by 2, which goes down to 0 or negative numbers. Now we've soaked all the damage that they're trying to inflict upon us, and it's our chance to attack. Now in this case, we know that we need to deal 3 damage. Fortification means nothing on melee for us, so we would actually be able to play these 2 cards, Rage and Determination, together to add attack 2 and attack 2 to make an attack 4 and be able to defeat this monster. Inversely, we could also play Rage and play Stamina if we wanted to sideways as an attack 1 to make an attack 3 to defeat this monster. There's lots of flexibility in your card play and how you want to do things, but ultimately as you kind of go through combat, you'll want to make sure that you think about, can I meet or exceed their values for both defense and offense to make sure that I'm able to beat and defeat these monsters. Any wounds that you take into your hand just stay there. Your other cards may be discarded and gone, but these will count towards your 5 hand limit. So next turn, I would only get to draw 3 cards from my deck instead of 5, really. So I'm going to want to work to get rid of these wounds as soon as possible. Either way, if we defeat the monster, we'll gain the fame on the bottom, and our turn will be able to continue if we want to take more actions. Now, this was a pretty basic kind of enemy. There are lots of enemies. For instance, here's an example of a Draconum. This Draconum has lots of stats that may be very confusing. We see he's worth 7 points, which is awesome. He's evasive, which means he has 7 defense or 14 defense, and that depends on if we block his whole attack. If we block everything he deals to us, he's only 7 defense. If we take any of the damage from him, it's 14 defense, so he's very hard to beat. We see that he has a frost resistance, which means we're not able to deal damage to him with cold spells or cold attacks. We'd have to deal damage with fire, cold fire, or physical to try and get around that. Actually, I think physical is also reduced on this. He does ice attacks to us, which means he's going to deal a lot of damage to us, and we have to be able to defend that with fire defense to block it, cold fire defense to block it, And if we use ice or basic defense, like these block cards here, their effect is halved. So these block 2s would only be block 1. So we need a lot of card play to try and block that damage. So this is a very powerful monster. He also has his speed ability here as well, which means he's going to hit us really, really hard with some unique abilities called Swift, which is if he has Swift, he's basically even harder to block. Then you have to play blocks that basically double his value. So instead of 4 for blocking him, we need to block 8. So this is a very, very powerful monster, which is why he's worth so many points. Here's another example of an enemy that you could find in a mage tower. He, as you see, has physical and fire resistance. He does fire damage, and he has an ability called Brutal, which is he does all of his damage to the heroes. He basically ignores any units that we may want to block. He wants to hit us. If we fail to block his attack, he does double his damage to us. So instead of 3, he would be dealing 6 to us. So there's all kinds of enemies. These are just a smattering of the potential options that you can find in a game of Mage Knight. But you can begin to see how the concept of combat is honestly very quick and clean and simple, but the intricacy comes into play when you think about your deck, what you have available, and what you're fighting against, because there are so many types of defensive abilities, offensive abilities, damage types, damage resistances, and all of that plays into a beautiful math game that you have to play in your head as you go through a game of Mage Knight. I really enjoy the way combat works, but I just want to flag, there's a lot of symbology that you've got to learn to fully master this game. And that, in the world's largest nutshell, is how you play Mage Knight and can jump in and have a really good time with this game. Gameplay will kind of continue like this with players taking turns until the rounds that are set out in your scenario are completed. Whoever has the most fame wins. It's a nice, quick, and clean game. There are achievements at the end of the game where you'll be gaining additional fame for how many spells you have. Whoever has the most gets points. How many cities you control. How many things you control. Just different kind of accolades, achievement-style things that you'll be battling it out with your opponents for will give you additional fame. Once that's all tallied up, whoever has the most fame is the victor. And the scenarios do lay out different conditions. Again, this is just the main kind of competitive scenario, but there are cooperatives, there are solos, there's ones where the victory conditions are entirely different. One where you're fighting like kind of a playable character boss general that you need to hunt down and defeat him. There's all kinds of different ways that you can play, and they're all really fun and engaging. Again, just to kind of clarify, overall review and feeling about this game is super positive. I love deck builders. I love sandbox games. This is my kind of game. I really enjoy it. You've got these beautiful pre-painted miniatures. You've got these kind of nice like hero clicks style cities that shows the level and how many enemies you'll be fighting. All of that is really cool, really meaningful, really engaging to me. There are some cons or negatives that you need to think about as you consider purchasing this game. One is, which I joked about it before, but literally this deck of cards is just basically the reference guide to tell me on the board what do all these things mean and what do they all do and how do they all work. Now, thankfully, they're all here and I can find them very easily and kind of move on, but that's a lot to put in your memory banks, you know, just to know like, oh, that symbol means this and that goes here and this means I can use influences. Like there's just a lot of ifs, thans, and all the connectivity and interactions on the board kind of laid out in all these cards. So it's just a lot to keep track of. Thankfully, there's 3 rule books to help you keep track of it. There's the very, very helpful game walkthrough, which I love, the game rulebook, which is a little verbose, but still very good, and the expansion rulebook, which is somehow bigger than the main rulebook. But all of these things are really helpful to help you understand the game and walk you through it. It's just a game that it helps to have and play the first time with someone who already knows what they're doing, because it's such a big bite for how everything works, interacts together. Now, the Ultimate Edition just adds in the expansions that were in kind of out there in the world with Mage Knight. They've kind of consolidated it all into one big box. It gives you more playable characters. It gives you new enemies and spell, kind of more of everything, more unique types of units that have to have like reputation requirements, new scenarios. There's different ways that you can play now. Like I said, there's one where you have like these giant mana wheels that change as you kind of interact with these factions on the board. There's lots there. There's a ton of scenarios in the base game as well that give you cooperative, competitive, solo, different game end conditions, but this again was kind of just showing you the main, what I enjoy, just the main competitive game where you're dropped in, you're trying to kind of take these cities back from the evil forces that are oppressing them and get the most fame. There's some achievements that you'll be fighting with other people for like most spells, most things controlled, most flags on the board, but at the end of the game you'll tally up your fame and that's it. Just whoever has the most fame wins. It's nice, it's quick, it's clean. I joke, it's not necessarily quick. This game can be a little long. I showed you a game with 3. I think 3 is a really sweet spot number to play this game with. Playing it with 5, I can't imagine. I played it with 4 and the game drug very, very long. We did have a lot of teaching things, but still, this is probably a 3-4 hour game, even with experienced players. So that is a bit of a time commitment. But for all of that, for the price of this game, you are getting infinite replayability, infinite fun. If you like deck builders, sandbox style games, this is one that you should definitely check out. It's an old game and it still stands, in my opinion, very much on its own. It stands on its own 2 legs. There are some aspects where you can tell it's dated. There are certain things that I'm just like, oh, we've seen games kind of fix that or do different things than that since then. But this game, for its age, for how long it's been around, is incredible. It deserves its complexity rating on BGG, but it also deserves its rating on BGG. This is a quality game that if you've not gotten a chance to play as a gamer, I certainly encourage you to get this one kind of off your shelf and give it a try, get it played. Just like TI, John Company, a few other games, I feel like this is one of those games that just you should at least play once to kind of check it off your board game bingo list because it is so, so incredible. So I want to thank WizKids for letting us get a review of this, get this out there to show you guys. I'd encourage you guys to check out Mage Knight. It is very, very fun. I had a blast with it. I'm going to be playing this again with my buddies in the next couple weeks here before the holidays. There's a lot of fun to have. I want to keep bringing this one back to the table, and I think you guys will too. So with all that said, thank you so much for coming to Meeple Mountain to check out our content. I hope you'll continue to do so. Like and subscribe, hit the bell. Let us know you're enjoying our content. We love putting out more stuff for you guys because we love board games. But yeah, thank you guys so much for coming and checking this out. And as always, happy gaming.
Thanks for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out these links to find some other games you might want to bring to the table. This is Tyler Williams, signing off.